Welcome back to the Liberty Bell podcast. Today is the 22nd of June. I didn't think that June would go by so fast. It means I have just a few more weeks until I head off to college. Big steps. Can't wait to be indoctrinated. Anyway, today is a strange time, not only for me, as I'm graduating high school in a few weeks, or forgive me, a few days. But within the last few weeks, we've seen the return of an economy and the mindlessness of the left and how easy it is to become somebody on the mindless left. And this is going to be a short little episode that I got for you, but it's everywhere. This mindlessness that you see is everywhere. You go on social media, you can't go one day without seeing something that has to do with the systemic racism issue or police brutality, or you should still be wearing a mask, even though the CDC and the, forgive me, not the CDC, the quote unquote experts like Dr. Fauci and those people that got on TV and told us to stay home for 2 months, how it's actually rare for asymptomatic people to spread it. Rare. And then people started freaking out for like 2 minutes, and then they said, "Wait, whoa, 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 whoa! That's not true. We were don't we're not. It's not that rare, but it's rare, you know. It's a load of shit. The experts in our field don't know shit. If they really did, they'd have a more consistent. They'd have more consistent messages to give us. I mean, you could say that there's nothing known about this virus, and that's why things are changing all the time. But you locked down a country at 2,000 cases. The best time to lock down the country, if you were going by case numbers, would be now, or when 1 million deaths happen, or not in the middle of a school year. But it doesn't matter. An economy that's booming, jobs that are being produced, and the stability that is in the American family doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. During the 60s, there was, during the 50s or 60s, there was a Hong Kong flu going around, and we didn't shut down an economy for jack shit. It's that simple. We didn't do it. Why didn't we do it? It it would have stopped the Vietnam War protests. I mean, if anything, so if you wanted to stop certain things from happening, shutting down an economy in the 60s would have stopped the Vietnam War protests until the 70s. But I digress. My main issue with the events that's happening is, I already said it earlier, but we've become mindless. We don't look at what's real. We feel. We choose to feel what we think is real. And it's not even real thinking. It's just circular logic. It's just pointing at random things until you can sort of correlate a point that doesn't actually correlate, like systemic racism or police brutality against blacks. The only thing that I can see that they're arguing about, which is a small minority that they're arguing about, is incarceration rates. Yeah, I think that it's a disproportionate number. But then again, why is it a disproportionate number? Exactly. And then I look at these mindless things that people post on their Instagrams or on their Twitters or on their social media pages, and it's just, if you bring up crime statistics, you are racist. How am I a racist for bringing up statistics? If you think that blacks are being incarcerated at a terrible rate more than other races, why is that? If it's not because of systemic racism, it's because their cultures in certain inner cities is causing it. There are more gangs in the inner city, and in the inner cities, like Chicago, they have the highest homicide rates. Why is it not allowed? Is it not a good thing to incarcerate people that are committing crimes? I'm not talking about drunk crimes, because drunk crime shouldn't be a thing. If there's a if it's a victimless crime like drugs, that's not a crime. Nobody's hurt. If society is hurt based on what your actions, like being high in public or you driving really slow. By the way, you shouldn't drive when you're high. That's not a good idea anyway. That's the same deal with being drunk in public. Normally, people aren't with people when they're drunk in public, but when they are, I mean, don't you have an incentive to help the person that is clearly inebriated? It's simple. Anyways, there's the main point I was going to get to was something that I did see on Instagram or Twitter. Let me find. Okay. So originally created by surgerydesign.com. Surgery redesign. Let's see what this post says. Becoming anti-racist. And it looks like the diagram of an eyeball. It's got the pupil, and then it's got the back, and then there's the layer of fat in the very back, and then that middle layer of, I don't remember what it's called. It's been a few months since I've taken anatomy. Becoming anti-racist. That's the first circle. Then the second circle is, quote unquote, the fear zone. The next one, the learning zone. And then the next one, growth zone. This better be good. Becoming anti-racist. First thing in the fear zone. I seek out counter arguments for experiences/facts of racism. I seek out counter arguments for experiences and facts of racism. Experiences. Your own personal experience. Someone else's personal experience. That defines a narrative? If some authority were to come arrest me for being a minority or doing some ratchet shit, honestly, is it because of racism? Or is it because I was doing ratchet shit? If I choose to resist arrest, am I being further punished for being a minority? Or is it because I am choosing to resist arrest? And then it goes into facts of racism. What facts of racism? That it used to be a thing? It's definitely still a thing that's around, but it's entirely not a non-issue. It's a non-issue. How many real racists do you know? How many people do you know that think that their race is superior? Their race, not their culture, not their country, but their race, based on the color of their skin. Who do you know? Virtually none of us know anyone. I mean, I don't know anyone. You can say you know somebody, but are they really? Have you met their family? Have you talked to anybody else that really knows them? People that are in their inner circle? You have no idea until you've gone that deep. Unless it's extremely blatant, like they're wearing a Ku Klux Klan hat. Let's read the next one. I deny racism is a problem. I deny racism is a problem. I deny what kind of racism is a problem. It just says racism. Of course, I don't believe that racists should exist. I believe that racism is a terrible thing. I believe that if you are a racist, you have some sort of God complex, and that needs to be taken care with, and we need to figure out some sort of psychological help. Not also that we need to study them to figure out why they believe that they have this superiority. But I deny racism exists. Who denies that racism exists in the world? I'm sorry, racism is a problem. In 2020, in our systems, which were by the way created by the left and which are held up by the left, just because the CEO of Carl's Jr. is a Republican does not mean jack shit. The CEO of General Electric is a full-on leftist. The CEO of Starbucks, not the former one, the current one. The CEO of Coca-Cola. People like to say that these big corporations are the problem and that they are more evil than having a big government when they can't even go into your house and take away your possessions, but the government can do that. It's these same corporations that they demand have the same narrative they do. There are more women CEOs, there are more CEOs of minority descent than there were in a long in our history. And it's unfathomable to think that people think that there's some sort of systematic racism. But that's my part about private business. Let's go into government. We had a black president. He had a black attorney general. Inner cities have had black mayors, black attorney generals, black senators, black police chiefs, black governors. But you're still calling for systemic racism. If there was systemic racism, why didn't Obama fix it? Is this thing on? Like, if the if the systems were inherently racist, wouldn't we all have noticed it by now? After the Civil Rights Act in Ferguson during that shooting, or the police shooting, Obama was calling it like the real roots of our racism are showing out. What racism? When you have a city with a black police chief, the black attorney general, the black mayor, with the all black police, the majority black police force during the time of a black president who also had a black attorney general, and one of the heads of the Senate Judiciary Committee was a black Indian? Is systemic racism where? If the race that which you think is being oppressed can get jobs like that, where's the issue? There's no issue if they are becoming more as prosperous as us in those fields. And by us, I mean other minorities and other races. I'm not white. I choose not to display what I am, but it's whatever. Let's go on here. The next thing on the fear zone, I avoid hard questions. It's hard to avoid hard questions when the questions aren't hard, they're just stupid and they're not well thought out. Next one. I remain silent about / ignore conversations about racism. I remain silent. No, I I don't remain silent. I'm doing a goddamn podcast. I remain silent about racism? Some of us have better things to do than be social justice warriors during a pandemic and during a time when some of us need money. Some of us have better things to do than complain about the world, than complain about a man who got brutally murdered. We all know it was bad. If you saw that video and didn't think that was bad, you have lost it. But where's the underlying evidence that, quote unquote, all cops are bastards? Where's that? Where's that underlying evidence? About roughly 1,049 people were killed by the police last year. Out of the unarmed section, there were about, say, 32. It was in the low 30s. Unarmed. 19 of them were white. 9 of them were black. This is the FBI. This is 2019. I heard an argument saying that the police like to underreport. No. It's not just saying no for the sake of saying no. When you shoot somebody, there is mandatory paperwork that has to be done. And knowing that there is mandatory paperwork that has to be done, and most of them are put on administrative leave, they report it. They have to report it on a precinct basis. I would imagine that some sort of funding goes into this. Like if you report, you get more funding because you're being transparent. 9? 9 unarmed blacks? Unarmed. Where's the racism? And then I get the argument that, oh, there's a population difference. Blacks make up 13% of the population. If they made up 13% of the population and there was a systemic plan to weed them out of the system, wouldn't they have been gone by now? 13%? Wouldn't there be more of an effort to kill more if there was a plan? If there was this racism, wouldn't there be more of an effort to get rid of a minority? Wouldn't there be? Or have I lost it? Does it just not make sense to go after the person that you're going after if you want them gone? Well, you can't make it obvious. You claim that it's an obvious issue, that systemic racism is a thing or an issue. So if it's that obvious, why aren't they making it that obvious? Why aren't they why aren't the people that they are quote unquote trying to eliminate endangered like zoo animals? That sounded wrong, but you think about zoo animals. The western lowland gorilla or gorilla. They're endangered. They're critically endangered. How many of them are still alive? I don't even know. But wouldn't you think that a culture now, or a culture that's generally dominated by black art and black creativity and all sorts of things that are created by minorities, that if racism was a real thing in our police force, in our government, that the minorities would be gone by now? I'm just saying. Call me a conspiracy theorist. The government, if they wanted to get rid of certain people, would. You saw it in the 1930s. You saw it in Germany. It was systemic. It was systemic in that country. Was it systemic here with the internment camps? Not systemic. Maybe not. You had you had a good chunk of people that were for the Civil Rights Act. There was laws passed to get black people to go into the armed services. People say that it's because they needed more men and they didn't care. But at the same time, there's some sort of progress being done. And then flashback to today, where is that racism? I avoid hard questions. But I remain silent about racism. Racism is not a major problem in America, let alone a minor. It's an outlier in our problems. An outlier that's low. Next up on the sphere zone, I strive to be comfortable. Strive to be comfortable. When you're living in the most culturally totalitarian time, I remain comfortable about racism? No. Hmm. I strive to be comfortable. Is it comfortable as in where I sit or where I shit my words? Where I say what I think? Do I need to be in a group of people that make me feel comfortable in order to think? No. I'm doing it by myself right now in this old beaten up chair with no lights on. I'm just saying things. This is not comfortable for me because I feel like my voice, according to this recording software, is completely different from what I hear it to be. Next, I talk to others who look and think like me. That one really gets me. I talk to others that look and think like me. When you have an entire party that caters and panders to minorities for their vote, specifically for their vote, not to fix any of their problems, because let's face it, they haven't been fixed in those cities where they've been promised to be fixed. But I talk to people that look and think like me. I've never been taught to think like a victim. Sometimes I do it in the heat of the moment when I'm being accused of doing something wrong. And that's on me because like come on, some of us don't want to get in trouble. But society has never made minorities feel like they can't accomplish the same thing as whites. Oh wait, not society, but our current democratic leaders. Quotes from Jesse Jackson and Reverend Earl Sharpton constantly telling minorities that they can't get anywhere because of racism. While they're on the podium, while my mother, who was poor for all of her childhood, gets into a low acceptance rate private college and is like the top, not like, who is part of the top 10 at her school. She's a victim? Of what? She grew up poor in a metropolitan area where, and during the 70s, and during the 80s, and during the 90s, during the most prosperous economic times, not the 70s, forgive me for that, the 80s, during the most prosperous economic times for us in that century. Poor. And gets into a college like that. There's no money to pay for it. She went. No money to pay for it, except for student loans. But you're telling me that racism is in the way of people's goals? The only racism in the way of people's goals is the racism that's put on to people because they think that certain groups can't get anywhere without an extra boost. I think we all know that one smart kid that's either Mexican or Asian. Well, that's stereotypical. That's the general case. Or we all know that kid that's smart and is black, or that's smart and is Middle Eastern or Jewish. What oppression do they have? Jews are considered white. A lot of Mexicans, they don't have a specific column whenever they say, what's your race? They say, are you Hispanic or Latino? And then they say, what's your race? And there's no Hispanic line there. So we have to put white. That's not a real problem. But at the same time, why does it matter? Because economically proven that minorities live in worse neighborhoods? In which cities, though? In the inner city? Inner city living is terrible. People should have the means and the will and a way to get out of that for your kids' safety and for your kids' future. Get a good job. Work your way up in the job. Work countless hours. Even if it takes time away from your kid will be glad and proud that their parent went through all the trouble to make your life better. But I talk to others who think and look like me. Absolutely horrid. Because not only are they doing the exact same thing, because you can't talk about the crime statistics and talk about the police statistics that are shown from the FBI because you're quote unquote racist, and you can't be silent, and you can't not post the black square, and you can't not do these certain things, or else you're racist. I talk to people that think and look like me. The only reason that they think like you but don't look like you is because of this victim mentality that people like you and people in the Democratic Party are trying to push onto them. There is no real victimhood. Privilege comes from where your economic status is, and your economic status is affected by the way that your parents chose to act before and during your developmental stages. Were your parents married when they had you? Were they married before you were born? Were they married as soon as you were born? Did they graduate high school? Did they go to college? Did they have a job? Do they have a job that pays them well, pays them enough for you to live? Some people say that the rents are going up and everything's going up. You need to act smart before you make mistakes. Not saying that children are mistakes. Children are blessings. But you can't choose to be negligent of your current job situation and your current economic status if you're going to be choosing to fool around and you might get somebody else pregnant. This podcast has gone on way too long, but I'm not even done yet. Okay. We've gone out of the fear zone. Now we're going to the learning zone. I recognize racism is a current and present problem. Where? I already asked. Where? Where is it? If you say it's from the South, is it because of that stereotypical Alabama person saying all sorts of dirty things about people? That's a bad thing. Of course it's a bad thing that somebody says nasty things about another race. But does that mean it's systemic? Does that mean that that person who most likely lives in a trailer, doesn't have a high school education, just drinks beer and shoots guns all day? Do you think that they have a real role in our society other than their vote? And their vote, which who people do vote mindlessly. I understand that. Women vote typically what their husbands want them to vote. I don't agree with it, but a lot of the times it happens. But are these people in our system? Are these low-life people who, once again, probably didn't graduate high school, probably didn't grow up in a good home that taught them that everybody is worth something, no matter their skin color? Do you think that they're in our system? I don't think they would even know how to operate an iPhone, let alone any sort of government deals, any sort of responsibility. I seek out questions that make me feel uncomfortable. What kind of questions? Like, where's your you have white privilege? Why do you have white privilege? White privilege is a thing. Privilege based on your race is also considered racism. You are claiming things that, based on your race, have benefited you because of your race. Talk about victimhood. Talk about victocrat. Talk about somebody who just will not let go of the I'm oppressed vibe. Some of these people grew up with pools in their backyards. Some of these people grew up in places like, where are the suburbs? Suburbs of Los Angeles, suburbs of Houston, suburbs of New York. And you're telling me that even though you have darker skin than I do, that you're oppressed when you live in this neighborhood? What questions make you uncomfortable? It's a mystery to me. The next one. I understand my own privilege in ignoring racism. Privilege? You mean the thing that people claim has a hold on the way certain people think because of their skin color? So being white, you ignore that there's racism in the world? No. It's in our history books. We passed the Civil Rights Act. By the way, the party of the quote-unquote minorities, the Democratic Party, voted for. They voted against it. They voted against the Civil Rights Act. The Republican Party and the Democratic Party never switched during the Civil Rights Act. People claim that that people were switching parties left and right and center. Barry Goldwater was against the Civil Rights Act because it takes away the right of private business to conduct private business. If the Civil Rights Act was only for public use, then it would make more sense. Because private business should be allowed to do whatever it wants. That's what Barry Goldwater said. And that's what the Republicans were for. Of course they don't like the fact that there are people that act racist in those private businesses, but the thought is that if you know somebody who did something to you based on race, nobody would go to that restaurant anymore. There'd be massive incentive to stay away from places like that. Well, people say that Democrats switched over to the Republican side because of the Civil Rights Act. How many senators switched? One. His name was Strom Thurmond, and nobody fucking liked him. Nobody did anything with him. He was a joke. And it's a surprise that he stayed in Congress for this long. Surprise. Republicans were also competitive in the South since the 20s. The first Republicans to be elected were black. But it's my own privilege. Next one on the learning zone. I educate myself about racial bias, racial histories, and systemic racism. I already talked about systemic racism, but racial history and racial bias. Racial bias will always be a thing on a personal level. We've passed the Civil Rights Act. It is not an issue in our institutions. It can't be. And people say that judicial activism, where they can use their own views to sway certain things, no, can't work like that. You have other courts, like federal courts or appeals courts, that take away those things if they find something wrong with them, and the majority would find something wrong with a racist claim, if it was. Racial history. We have Black History Month. We have Asian American Month. We have Pride Month. We have a we have months based on race and racial history. Why? Why do I need a month for people to learn about history of the people that were descended from the same common area? Why is it needed? It just shows that you are desperate to try to sort of give this off message that you are an ally to racism. We're not even done yet, boys. I am vulnerable about my own biases and knowledge gaps. How many of you are biased? See, this is the problem. It's just a white guilt. It's a white liberal guilt thing. They feel like because they are white, they have an advantage over people, when typically that's not true. It's not true. Scratch the typically. It's not true. What you're born into is your actual privilege. And being white has nothing to do with it. If white privilege exists, think about the kid in Kentucky who lives in a trailer with his uneducated parents, who has that 1.7 GPA, who can't read, who lives in a crime-ridden area in Kentucky. Red state, majority white. Where is the racism there? Where's the white privilege there? If white people are beneficial in ways that blacks aren't, then why aren't people in those southern states that you claim have the most racism, why aren't they doing as well? Where's their white privilege there? Where's their white privilege there? About my own biases. What biases do you have? This fake myth about unconscious bias, that racism is in our DNA, that we all are born to think like racists, when in fact, it's all about how you're raised. Is this thing on? I listen to others who think and look differently to me. No, you don't. No, you don't. People that post these things are quote unquote woke anti racist social justice warriors. They only listen to people that think like them. They only engage in conversations with people that look like them. And if they're in a conversation with a conservative or a libertarian like me, they cancel them because they don't think like they do. They're not playing the same oppression Olympics that they are. They're not playing the let's feel bad for a certain race of people because they are that certain race sort of game. This lie that systemic racism is real. This lie that white privilege is the reason that blacks aren't able to succeed and that minorities aren't able to succeed because of white people. It's a lie. Another thing, quote, I learned from educators and individuals who are BIPOC. I'm guessing POC is person of color. It doesn't matter who you learn from, as long as you are learning something about the thing that you want to learn. If you're talking about learning certain things about race and racism, why are the people that you're listening to typically white liberals? Your white liberal professor, your white liberal teacher, your white your white parents. You're not black parents. You're not Mexican parents. Or if they are, they're teaching you that there's so much evil in the world that they learned from who? Their white professors or their parents who learned it from somewhere else. It's a damaging lie. Next thing, I acknowledge my ancestral history of contributions to benefit to and benefits from racism. Like slavery, like Jim Crow laws? Like what? You know that the first major slave owner in America, slave trader, slave owner too, he was black, rich man. Did you know that in Africa they traded their own people? It had nothing to do with skin color. They were all inferior to each other, according to their eyes, according to their own teachings. It was all about class. It wasn't about skin color. In America, it was about skin color because, I mean, the white slaves, that was about class. But when they traded from Africa, they looked different. So yeah, that was racism. But I acknowledge my ancestral history is a contributor to racism. If you're white, okay. If you're white, you acknowledge that people in your time, that white people in the 1800s did some terrible things. In the 1900s, voted against civil rights. Terrible things. But you yourself aren't a part of that thought process of racism. You yourself aren't a racist. Most likely. I don't know who's listening. You acknowledge that people were bad, and the majority of them were white in America who traded slaves and who whipped people because they were darker than they were. It's a terrible thing. We all learned it. Next, we're in the growth zone. I identify how I may unknowingly benefit from racism. Unknowingly benefit in 2020. Benefit from racism. Where? Where is the racism? Where is it? Give me an institution. What is it, Chick-fil-A? They hire people that are LGBT. It's not anything to do with racism, but people like to claim that private businesses discriminate based on other things too. If I'm a stockholder in Carl's Jr. and we donated to countries that kill people based on their skin color, that's me benefiting from racism. But where else does it, if it's donating to police, if it's donating to police stations and the 100 Club or whatever, does that mean I'm benefiting from racism? It doesn't. It means I'm donating to our local law enforcement. Local law enforcement's not racist. It's been proven there's no systemic racism in there. Of course, there are racist people that do work in there. I mean, there's racist people everywhere. A handful, mind you, a handful. It's not prevalent. It's not deeply rooted. You just have people that are badly willed and who don't care about their fellow man, no matter skin color. There are always bad people like that. A handful. A handful. Next up on the growth zone, I promote and advocate for policies and leaders that are anti-racist. Leaders that are anti-racist. How do you define that? Is it somebody who believes in the same things that you do? Is it somebody of color because they quote unquote understand the problems that are at hand? Somebody who's a minority, like Ted Cruz? Would you vote for Ted Cruz? He's a minority. If there's racism going on to minorities, then he would understand it, right? policies that are anti-racist. The Civil Rights Act, which Republicans passed. The 13th Amendment, which Republicans and the lame duck Democrats passed. There's a history with race in the Democratic Party. They claim to be on the side of the minority now. They've always been obsessed with race. They only talk about race issues now, and they only used to, and back then, they used to talk about how the other races were problems. Always been on about race, the Democrats. Always. And they've always believed in some sort of big government, social working things. Don't get me wrong, the Republican Party has been big government too. I'm not a Republican. They're both proprietors of big government. That's terrible. I sit with my discomfort. Discomfort of what? Your discomfort that there are bad things going on in the world? That women aren't allowed to drive without their husband's permissions in third world countries, but it's Islamophobic to talk about that? Your own discomfort. Discomfort about what? That 9 people got shot who were unarmed and who are black last year. 9. Because one's too many. Because somebody who is a threat, but is unarmed, is not really a threat. Because somebody who is drunk in a Wendy's parking lot should not have been shot, even though he was resisting arrest and he was pointing a weapon at the cops. The Atlanta police overcharged him. He's going to get off. He's going to walk scot-free because they overcharged him, because you have ruined justice. Sorry guys, just a minor pause there. I had to take care of something real quick. Got the attention from someone else. Where was I? I was on I sit with my discomfort, that's right. Next one was I speak out when I see racism in action. How many of us have had to, quote unquote, speak out when you see actual racism in action? How many of you have actually seen real racism in action? Not somebody who's not black saying the N-word, but real racism. Where have you seen it? It's not in the police. It's definitely not in the police. I mean, we already know. I already said there's police officers can be racist. There's always somebody who can be racist. Blah blah blah. But it's not inherent. Okay, next one. I educate my colleagues, friends, family about racism and its impact. Who doesn't know? Who fucking doesn't know? Who doesn't know? The history. It's in our history books. We're constantly reminded. You educate other people, your parents, who are older than you and who have been more aware of the world for a longer time than you. You educate them on your wokeness, on your holier than thou bullshit. I educate my family and friends. If they had the means to, if there was a real issue, of course they would quote unquote educate themselves. But what are you educating yourself on? You're educating yourself on feelings and black nationalism. Malcolm X praising violent protest because that that got so much more done than nonviolence. That got more done than Mahatma Gandhi. That got more done than Martin Luther King Jr., who got the Civil Rights Act to be passed, essentially. Embarrassing. Next, I don't let mistakes deter me from doing better. How is that growth from being anti-racist? You mean the actions of others when you yourself haven't committed those actions? you make yourself better from things you never did. If you believe in reincarnation, you can make that argument, but where is it? I don't let mistakes deter me from doing better. Mistakes of other people aren't mistakes of you just because you're in the same group. That's collectivism. That's evil. You are an individual. The next ones. I yield positions of power to and amplify voices of those who are marginalized. I yield positions of power to and amplify voices of those who are marginalized. So you, a more qualified person in the job market or in your congressional district to be representing people, somebody who has real knowledge, someone who has more real connections, someone who isn't just using their race. You yield positions of power and you amplify voices, specifically those that are of people that are marginalized. How are they marginalized? People on the right and libertarians fight for real equality, not equality of outcome, but equality of opportunity, which we've had. Once again, civil rights. You can be anything you want to be, no matter your race. But no one cares. It's not woke enough. If you really believed in educating yourself on history, you know that, but you don't care. Next, I surround myself with people who look and think differently to me. If you are around people that think like you and they happen to be of the same race, does that make you racist? If you are a liberal, which is the majority of the people that I'm seeing, they are white liberals who are posting the same things on these same social media platforms, and they're all talking to each other about racism. They don't look different to you, and they don't think different to you. The majority of these people that are posting these things are women. Angry white women. Angry women. That they're angry about the same things, so they think the same. They look different, maybe on race, but they don't think differently, and they do look the same when you compare it to their sex. Why are white people trying to act like they know about racism? Why are black people trying to tell white people that they are racist when they aren't being oppressed? When a white person doesn't do something that the black person wants, or there's a mishap with the police, that's oppression? Police can't get it right 100% of the time. And if you think they have to get it right 100% of the time, then you must live in Candyland, Utopia, some sort of paradise where bad things don't happen. But that's not reality. If you were a realist, you would understand this. If you were a realist and you believed in the facts, you would understand that this is all bullshit. I talk to people that look and think differently from me. A lot of you don't. That's where I'm going to end it. When you're saying the same things that your friends are saying, and there's no real disconnect, there's no disagreement, not necessarily you have a problem, but if it doesn't diverge into other topics, where you do disagree, that's a problem. Agreeing with each other for fear of being racist or fear of being some sort of quote unquote phobia, that's a problem. If you're not allowed to disagree on policy and on things like systemic racism being an issue, you have no real basis for your argument, and you are just saying the same thing that the same uneducated people have been saying for years and years. You are no better. You are no better. That's it for the Liberty Bell podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you all have a great day.